think the next 5 years we're going to see more disruption than what I've seen in the 42 years that I've been in the business.
Autonomous trucking only works where it hooks up and syncs in with manually driven trucks that are feeding that.
By having that middle mile done autonomously, you create more jobs where we're going to need more drivers doing that local delivery work and that pickup work. I think autonomous trucking is going to be the most transformative event that's hit the supply chain in decades.
The products that we are building today will give our customers a one-stop shop for managing any freight they move with Uber Freight. When we started building this technology, it was focused on how do we empower truck drivers, how do we empower the owner-operators, the small fleets, to leverage technology to make their jobs better and easier. We see autonomous trucking as that next new mode of transportation. You can move things faster, more efficiently, more sustainably.
Our mission is to enable same-day shipping to every person on the planet.
Our job is to move fast and to deliver a game-changing, world-changing product. Logistics needs better solutions. We work across defense logistics, humanitarian logistics, and commercial logistics.
And we're looking forward to getting these systems out in the world to do useful service for communities.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Henrik, Holland, and I'm the Global Head of OnDemand Energy and Mobility at Prologis. We're going to continue the groundbreaking conversations of today with a discussion about autonomy. We've heard a lot about AI today and about how AI is transforming basically everything, and an area that it is having a major impact is on the autonomous movement of goods and people. Here today with us to dive into this topic is a very esteemed panel of groundbreakers who are leading the charge in this industry. And I'll briefly introduce them to you before we dive into the topic. So I'll start with Olivia. Olivia, who leads autonomy and truck electrification at Uber Freight, responsible for deployment, operations and partnerships across Uber Freight's $20 billion global freight network. Next to Olivia is David Merrill. David is the founder and CEO of Elroy Air, developing vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL, autonomous aircraft specifically designed for the movement of goods. Next to Dave is Lee. Lee White has a storied career spanning multiple decades, starting with UPS, starting as a driver at UPS, to working on autonomous strategy at a company called Too Simple. Today, Lee is with the Department of Transportation, spearheading policy around innovation with respect to transportation and mobility. In order for us to get started, let's set the stage for a moment. So I'd like to ask our panelists, and I'll direct this question to all of you, what autonomy means at scale. So what does scale for you look like, and why is autonomy so critical for the future of transportation and logistics? And perhaps you can answer the question through the lens of something that is remarkable about your industry that the audience might not immediately think of and might be like a novelty or something surprising. I'll start with you, Olivia.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Henrik. It's great to see all these different leaders in their field come together to share what is next for the industry and where the puck is going. And so one area that I focus on is on autonomous. And for us at Uber Freight, where we manage about $20 billion of freight annually, we have about 200,000 carriers and trucks on our platform. We also really value our drivers. So a lot of times I get the question of why autonomy, what exactly is it? So when we think about autonomy, the reason why it is invaluable to our network is because we want to fill that gap between supply and demand for our customers. We want to meet our customers where they are, and sometimes that means a very cyclical, seasonal market, and there is a gap between supply and demand, whether that's during the pandemic, during produce season, during back to school season, holidays, etc. There's oftentimes a shortage. And what we are trying to do is empower both drivers on the carrier side as well as shippers to fill that demand with autonomous capacity. For us, when we talk about autonomy, what we mean is level 4, no driver inside the cab. There's no dependency on someone going in and getting their CDL, the training, et cetera. We're seeing this opportunity to become a truck driver. There are many more alternatives nowadays that are much more appealing. And so the entry into truck driving has slowly declined. And how do we continue to fill the growing demand across our shippers to ship goods in time to their distribution centers, retail, et cetera? And so for us, autonomy at scale is hitting that point where we can fulfill and bridge that gap between supply and demand. And today we're building the foundation for that. We're still in the early innings. We're still running pilots. We're still primarily in Texas. But at scale, we anticipate to be across the country, helping all of our customers across various geos, across all freight corridors, fulfill their need for trucking capacity.
Thanks, Olivia. Dave?
Sure. So happy to be here in this room full of all of you leaders. My company builds autonomous cargo drones. And so what that looks like is an aircraft flying itself from one point to another, one place to another, which can be the corner of a shipping yard, can be a helipad, can be an airport, but doesn't have to be an airport because it's a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. And so the unusual thing that you might not know is that companies that are building smaller drones, I'll mention my industry peers like Zipline and Google Wing. You may have heard of Mana Drone. They've been doing this already for up to 10 years. And so this is actually not new. They started in the smaller drone category, building delivery drones and fielding them in places like Africa and Australia and Asia, and now bringing these operations to the US. So that's a great kind of trailblazing action that these companies are already out there doing. What we're doing is building bigger drones that can carry more cargo, that can go longer distances, and will serve the middle mile route for commercial shippers like FedEx, that will serve humanitarian shippers that do a lot of work now with old Russian helicopters that are very difficult and expensive to maintain, and military resupply. And the same vehicle can serve all three of these needs. And so for us, autonomy means an aircraft without a pilot on board flying from one place to another, but there is a human being, there's a pilot on the ground paying attention. So there's somebody watching, at first, watching one-to-one, and then what we'll do over time is watching one-to-many. And so it's a supervisory role where the pilot on the ground is not holding a joystick and steering that aircraft in a moment-to-moment basis, but they are supervising, watching the route, making sure that everything is going the way it's supposed to. And then if they need to, they can change the route. And if it needs to be pulled back because of weather or because of air congestion, they can do that too. So at scale, what this looks like is today there's about 45,000 flights a day in the airspace, regular man-piloted flights. Drones will double and then vastly exceed that if given the proper regulatory support. And so I see hundreds of thousands of drone flights doing deliveries out warehouse to warehouse, warehouse to small community, warehouse into urban centers over time, leveling up high-performance logistics so that you can get that same day, you can get that next day shipment of a medicine, a prescription, or an e-commerce need, or that thing for your house that you need. And so that's really the end goal, is higher performing logistics that reaches a lot of new places, a lot of new communities that don't have access to really fast, really high performing logistics today.
Great, thanks, Dave. And I see we already have some virtual drones flying around us here on the screen. So, Lee, how about you?
Henrik, thank you. I'm excited to be in this room and engaging in this conversation. I will tell you, what does scale mean to me? It's what I experienced this morning. I had an autonomous taxi pick me up in front of my hotel and drop me out right in front of this conference center. And to scale, that means having those types of solutions really embedded in our entire transportation infrastructure and in our supply chain as well. To me, I think it's moving us from
this inflection point that we're at where we've got this isolated pilots going on all sorts of different places to an integrated national network that optimizes the safe adoption of this technology and enables us to experience the benefits, the actual demonstrated, the accidents that are avoided, the safety improvements that we're able to achieve, the optimization that this enables, and again, ultimately enabling the U.S. to be a leader in this industry and lead the way on a global scale. So that, to me, is really my view of what this looks like to be at scale. Secretary Duffy announced that NHTSA's federal autonomous vehicle framework is going to be moving forward. That's a priority, and I think that's a great step of what the government can do to, again, help move this towards scaling in terms of solution in all modes, whether it's the drones and eVTOL and what we see in transportation solutions from passenger vehicles to mining applications to every application where we've got the opportunity to really move forward.
Yeah. And Lee, maybe sticking with you for a moment there. So the experience that you just described, where you arrived here today in an autonomous vehicle, talking to people who have gone through that experience for the first time, it's kind of like a transformational experience. I know that it was for me. I had always looked at autonomy through kind of a techno-economic lens until I got on my first Waymo, and I thought, hey, this is like a really different experience. And experiencing that goes a long way to building trust. But trust is really important, right, in the adoption of any type of new technology, trust around safety, et cetera. Now, from the position of where you sit, like, how do you see us move forward on that, and how do you strike the balance between, oversight and speed to adoption?
Yeah, Henrik, that's a great question. So I'm going to go back. It was 7 years ago for me. So right now I'm a Deputy Assistant Secretary, and I'm in the office of the Secretary's office in the Department of Research and Technology. But that's kind of where I am now. But 7 years ago is when I had my first ride in an autonomous truck. That's during a 35-year career at UPS, as you mentioned, where I had been supervising some of the best drivers in the industry. And I remember being a part of that, and as that truck navigated some of the most difficult intersections, an unprotected left turn, through the highway downtown in a city in Arizona. And I was amazed at the uncanny perception and performance that didn't involve any driver engagement. It was completely done by the computer driving that truck. And I remember standing as I got out of that truck, and this is, again, after years in the transportation business, looking up at that truck and say, I'm never going to be able to look at trucking the same again. And for the last 7 years, I haven't changed that view. Yeah. So now, what do we do from terms of US DOT? I think, the advancement, the need to have public trust in this process is absolutely critical. The DOT just put out an RFI to the industry to gather that information. That's all public information that we're going to be sharing, that ultimately the data that we collect, the information on the edge cases and the disengagements, will ultimately work its way into this federal framework. So it's exciting. We need to move fast. But I'm going to say this. And this room full of leaders understands priorities and how those change. Safety isn't just a priority as we go down this road. It is a foundational pillar. Priorities will change as business goes on, but the safety and the validation of that, that is a foundational pillar and critical for how we move forward.
Yeah. And Olivia and Dave, how do you think about that from a private sector perspective? So how do you work with government and communities to build that trust and overcome those barriers to adoption?
Yeah, so for us, we have a very strong policy team. We work very closely in maintaining that transparency on a federal level, but even on a state and local level as well, since we operate in various markets. With trucking, when you cross state lines, then it requires more of a federal level of engagement. But we also are very selective with our partners. So the partners that we choose today, the partners that are hauling freight with us are Aurora, Wabi, and Volvo Autonomous Solutions. And we are very selective around what is your stance regarding safety, as well as what is your level of engagement with regulators. And that can be on a national standpoint of working with the FMCSA, as well as the DOT, as well as on the local level of engaging the local communities who need to understand, who are actually going to be engaging with these trucks on the road, on the interstate. They are the ones who are going to have the most questions about how this technology works, because they're going to see them on their commute to work, on their way to picking up their kids from school. And so for us, it is very important to identify the right partners that understand that this is really important towards social acceptance and adoption, and building both a team, but also the transparency and the communication channels to allow for that two-way conversation, and always being open and having the ability to share data, the ability to share and take in responses as well, and take in feedback on what's going well and what's not.
What we do is the way we've developed our technology is very methodical and documented. And if you looked at the set of steps that we take, for example, a new build of our code through before it goes on the aircraft and flies the aircraft, it's a lot of steps, from peer review to simulator that has aircraft hardware. So you're kind of putting the nervous system of the airplane in line with the simulator, to subscale, like a miniature model aircraft that flies the same code, and then we fly it on the full scale. So there's this set of checkpoints that we give ourselves to verify that we can operate our vehicle safely for the mission that we're setting out to do. And then transparent communication with our partners, whether those be local partners like the airport that we operate at, testing today. When we meet with the FAA, we're very transparent about here's how we test, here's what we do, here's what we see, how we change the code or change our process if anything goes wrong. And I think the aviation has a history of that sort of sharing of information. And that's partly why there's such a good safety record in aviation, is that nobody's trying to hide their failures. They put them out there so that everyone can learn from them whenever something goes wrong. And so I think that's what we'll keep doing. That's what I encourage everyone building autonomous systems that need to go out and meet the world and operate in public need to do. And I think we're going to get there with a very safe system.
Yeah. So clear collaboration, partnership, and transparency are critical to building trust. You shared already, Lee, your example a little bit of 7 years ago, very tangible, and that being a life-changing experience. Olivia, as we look at what's going on today, could you give us an example of what's happening right now in your operations?
Yeah, happy to share. It's funny, we all remember our first autonomous ride, good or bad.
That's right.
I do think that one big part and component of our operations is also getting the industry up to speed on what the technology is, what the technology means, and sometimes that's offering a first ride and getting shippers, once they have a butt in the seat and actually experience it and it's tangible, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference on how they think about the technology. I always remind our customers, we're not talking about ADAS or cruise control. We're talking about full self-driving and not being dependent on a driver. And for us today, our operations with autonomous trucks, we run freight on autonomous trucks in the Texas Triangle every day. We're very grateful to the governor of Texas. He's pro-business, pro-innovation, and sees why this is imperative, both on a national level, but even for him on a state level for his economy. And so when we are running these trucking operations, oftentimes we get the question of, well, as long as you move my freight from A to B, whether it's a diesel truck or an autonomous truck or a human-driven truck, I don't really care as long as it's on time and it hits the price points I need. cut down on my transportation costs, even better. So a lot of times, what's really important when we bring them into this new technology, we have to explain and make sure we showcase and spotlight why is this different. And why is this important? Because when we do that, then the leaders of these transportation companies, the C-suite, are thinking about how they're planning their supply chain for the future. Today, there's small scale. We're talking about a handful of trucks running every day. But eventually, this will be, like we talked about, at scale. And what does that require in terms of infrastructure changes? What does that require in terms of personnel, maintenance, training, et cetera? And so we are working very closely with our customers in learning from today's operations and then building that foundation for us to scale. I think one really important component to this is today when we are operating, we also believe that it should not be a solution where you have this autonomous self-driven truck, but you have 20 operators in the background managing this truck, dispatching this truck. We have to build an end-to-end digital solution where we use automation in the operations itself as well and automate away a lot of the human labor that's required. Because a lot of our systems today are built around a driver's schedule. And when you have a self-driving truck, you no longer need those manual touch points. You no longer have to call the driver to see where they are, to understand when they're coming in, et cetera. You can then build an end-to-end digital automated solution that then our customers can better manage their OpEx costs, but also have a solution that's more reliable and efficient for transportation.
And Olivia, as you're running freight on these corridors in Texas and you're working with your customers on this, what are kind of the top things that really resonate with customers of why this is important and why they want to be involved with autonomous trucking and freight movement?
Yeah, I think the number one thing we see is what I mentioned earlier around the gap between supply and demand. So for example, we have a lot of freight coming out of Mexico, especially with nearshoring, that's only going to grow. And so there's this big imbalance, for example, on this Laredo lane in Texas, where there's a lot of freight going north and very few going southbound. So how do you find capacity for that? And we have customers that are already asking us, get me an autonomous truck there as soon as possible because I need more trucks moving. How do I lower rates? The other area that Lee has talked about is around safety, and insurance costs are very high for fleets today. Sometimes it may even bankrupt a fleet. And we can see the potential for if this transportation, this mode of transportation is truly safer, how does insurance get impacted? How do those premiums come down? How does cargo damage rates come down? Cargo insurance that I have to buy? How do I, control my claims department more and limit the number of people I need to hire to file claims? And we see the potential for rates to go down over time as well, because of things like insurance, more predictable maintenance, not having to pay for wages and benefits, et cetera. And so we see a lot of potential, and that's what our customers who are shippers care most about.
Yeah, that's super exciting. Dave, in aerial cargo movement, so what breakthroughs are you seeing right now? And can you share maybe an example of that put into perspective the challenges and the opportunities that you're dealing with?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, some of our peers have been operating smaller delivery drones for years now, so that's a great trailblazing group that's out there doing that. Some of the breakthroughs that we're seeing right now that allow us to build these systems have to do with the core technology, batteries getting better. We developed a hybrid electric system to overcome the fact that batteries are still not good enough yet for the length of flights that we need to do. So we're solving that problem internally. But I think I wanted to go back to kind of the why and recall we had the privilege, so FedEx is one of our partners, and we had the privilege a couple years ago, in fact, of having Fred Smith, who has unfortunately passed away, but he came to our facility to see what we were doing. And this was after we'd already established the partnership. First time he'd been on our site, and he walked the shop floor where we were developing and testing our systems for a couple hours and said, we haven't seen anybody else doing this the way that you are, and this is going to make a real impact on our network. And that's the kind of moment with a visionary that keeps us all going through these technical challenges, like got to make the hybrid system work and got to make the propulsion system work and got to figure out the regulatory framework that makes this all possible. And we're going to do that together. But when we hear from our customers like FedEx and Bristow and the Army that this is going to be a meaningful impact on what they can do, it makes it all worth it.
Awesome. Lee, I'm curious, as you're listening to our other two panelists talk about experiences or current breakthroughs, your experience 7 years ago, what do you see as like something that was like really instrumental and pivotal in the development of autonomous technology in the past few years? And what does that tell us about what we need to do and how we can accelerate going forward?
Yeah, so I'll go back to, so this, with my prior company, we had been looking at that solutions for years, but a lot of it was the mechanical and the robotic approach. It wasn't until the compute caught up around 2016 that it became an information problem, that we saw this quantum leap forward in who was presenting solutions to that. But I think what I'd like to do, Henrik, is tie this to some of the other panels that we've talked about and where this means going forward. Gene was just out here talking about record volume levels on containers, and I think that's a testimony as far as what's happened on the supply chain. But we got to look at this. This is a global competitive landscape right now that really has to move forward, right? I think Gene would probably tell you the same thing, that even though he's had record volume levels, he's probably more a threat right now in this port because things are moving faster. Canada, Mexico, they've got partnerships with rail and trucking. What our administration has been very clear on bringing manufacturing back. Well, if we're not ready network-wise from a cost competitive standpoint, we've got a global disadvantage. And what I think we've seen through some of these movements from the US DOT is, how do we unleash American innovation? How do we make it move faster? Autonomy, the drones, what we've got with these eVTOLs and what they'll be able to do. The interest from industry, how do we harness that and move that forward as quick as possible, right? So a lot of things that we're going to have to do. Gene was talking about the data and how they know 40 days in advance. We got to get real good with that, right? We got to get where that data gets optimized and we turn into some good solutions so that we are the most efficient that we can be, so that we can unleash this innovation and compete on the global scale.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put this in the perspective of our global competitive position, that this is really critical to ensuring long-term competitiveness of our industry. Bringing it to the human dimension a little bit, and Olivia, I'll start with you on this. Like, how is autonomy reshaping the role for drivers, shippers, and carriers? Like, what kind of new opportunities might be emerging for them?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about shippers and how we're thinking about how the infrastructure may have to change when we think about an autonomous truck pulling into their warehouse, and what that means to engage also with warehouse automation. We're seeing that take off for some of our customers as well, and the pilots they're running. How did those work hand in hand and talk to each other as well? For drivers and carriers, I think that's the most interesting one. For us, what we view, the way that autonomous trucking works today is in hub and spoke model. So there is a local leg, and then the autonomous leg, and then another local leg that does the end delivery. And I think there will always be a hybrid network where we need drivers, and we need drivers to do what the autonomous vehicle cannot do. That could be certain conditions, certain types of driving, certain types of human touch points that's required. And we see the role of drivers ultimately then, it means that the long haul driving can be taken care of. That part that is usually the least desirable can be taken care of by an autonomous vehicle. And the local driving, the sitting in traffic, the waiting at a facility, the waiting to get loaded, the maintenance, the inspection on the vehicle, et cetera, that can be all done by local drivers. And so what that means is we get to keep them closer to home. They get to sleep in their own beds instead of having to find parking, which we know has been such a big issue for many of our fleets. Having to find a hotel to stay overnight, having a safe place to park but also take a shower or get food. It's a big problem that we don't think about, but it's those small logistical questions that make it really hard and undesirable. And we're seeing the next generation not coming into the truck driving space because of it. And so for us, a lot of this change, what we expect is to be an improvement in the quality of life for truck drivers when you can keep them closer to their homes, local NGOs that they're familiar with, and doing the hard work that automation unfortunately just can't do.
I think that's a really important aspect of this is quality of life improvement for the drivers and the actors in the space that often gets a little overlooked. Dave, how about you? How do you look at this?
Well, for a place like Alaska, for example, where there's a lot of remote communities that rely on air cargo to get the prescriptions they need, to bring people in and out, but also to fill the shelves of the supermarket, there are a lot of days when the airlines that serve those communities don't fly because the weather is a little too bad. It's a little too stormy to fly. And so when that happens a couple days in a row, that's when it starts to become a problem and the shelves of the supermarket start to get barren, and so one of the opportunities with drones, like they'll still have pilots on these days that they can fly, but we can fly a lot of other days when they can't fly, and we can go to places where you don't need that entire Cessna Caravan to go and make a delivery because you've got a smaller amount of goods. And so I guess what I'm saying is mostly what we'll do is additive to the existing routes that are out there today, even for air cargo, like the middle mile airport to airport route. It's typically run by a Cessna Caravan that can carry a couple thousand pounds maximum of cargo. That's still going to run. But the benefit of a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, a delivery drone that goes straight up, over, straight down, doesn't need to operate from an airport, is that we can add new air routes that just go from warehouse to warehouse and don't even need to be from an airport. So I think they're not going to eat into the existing base of what the pilots and truckers are already doing. You're going to add a lot more express routes that couldn't even exist any other way.
Got it. So additionality versus replacement. Lee, I mean, you started your career driving for UPS. So how do you look at this?
Yeah, so I'm going to date myself, right? When I was driving a truck back in the 80s, a lot of my trucking friends were really worried about their jobs going away to the trains. It was just getting intermodal up. We were just growing that business, and they were very, very concerned about that. And now when you look at where intermodal is, it's one of the best trucking jobs. It's billions of dollars in its own economy, and it turned out to be a force multiplier. So one of the better jobs in trucking right now is these intermodals where they go to customers. It's a fairly consistent schedule. They get to be home at night. So, some of the things that we look at is the data shows that the young people aren't afraid of the work. They just don't want to be on the road for a long time. So I think we're headed towards that same type of thing, right, with the trucking opportunity for us. It's a matter of helping understand how we stand that up, making sure the regulation is there. It's going to be this gradual adoption. We're very confident. You look at the truckers and what happened during COVID. We're very pro-trucking. They were amazing in what they did and what they did and operate for our economy and what the truckers did. I think it's a complementary solution as we move forward.
Yeah. Staying with you for a moment there, Lee, as we wrap up the panel, we have a short amount of time to talk about a lot. You mentioned gradual adoption, but let's fast forward 10 years. Like gradual adoption year over year still could be a massive change over a period of time like 10 years. Could you leave us with your thoughts on what are we going to look at 10 years from now? What would you say we need to think about as we look at like 2035?
Yeah, I think So I've been in the industry 42 years, right? And I've seen a lot of changes in that time. But I think the amount of change and disruption that's coming over the next 5 years is really going to determine where we are in that global stage. What I would tell you this administration wants to do is unleash that innovation, that talent that sets us up for decades to come. The next 5 years are absolutely critical in how that moves forward.
No doubt, it feels like we're in a unique transformational moment in history, for sure. Dave, how about yourself?
I think 5 years out, we'll see hundreds of thousands of drone flights happening per day, and we're on track for that. And then if you look 10 years out, it's probably 1 million flights a day, and that just means everybody is getting same day, next day delivery of goods, e-commerce, prescriptions, things that they need at a very low latency. That's going to become like a utility that we don't have in most places today. People don't depend on that, but it'll become like running water or electricity. You can depend on being able to get something right when you need it. And these aerial routes that we'll be helping support will be taking these goods over pretty challenging, mountain ranges and long stretches, but at very, very fast speeds.
Olivia, how do you see the future?
Yeah, I think across all of the panels today, there was a lot of talk about AI and how it's going to shape our future. And a lot of it is around digital AI. And that's, the foundation models that are being built that uses internet from the data. I think a lot of what we're talking about is physical AI, as Jensen likes to call it. And when we talk about physical AI, the data is not the same. You can't go online and go scrape data and understand how a human would respond to a question, for example. You need actual physical data to build the robotics, to build the vehicles, et cetera. And so from my perspective, I think physical AI in these next 10 years are about to take off. But it does also require, like the Prologises of the world, the Uber Freights of the world, to collect that data and help accelerate this transformation. Because that data is not as simple as the way that we collect data today over the internet and the digital space. And so I think the next 10 years, we'll see a lot more of that, of building the physical AI models, and then also how these robotics, how these AI form factors actually interact with people as opposed to just on a screen, but in our day-to-day lives.
Well, speaking from growing from on the screen, from the virtual drones to the real ones, no doubt we'll be in a very different place 5 to 10 years from now. I want to thank you all for being on our panel today and having this fascinating discussion. Thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.